Senator Draheim.
Mr. President, I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the sergeants at arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. The Secretary will close the roll. Continuing on House File 4366, Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Draheim, we need to take it from the table. So, Senator Draheim, will you move to take the bill from the table?
So moved.
Senator Draheim moves to take House File 4366 from the table. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. House File 4366 is now on the table. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Before we get into the housing portion of this bill, I would just like to thank my committee members and staff before I forget. As most of you know, it's my birthday today, so I'm getting more forgetful. So my vice chair, Senator Duckworth, the ranking member, Senator Dietzick, Senator Rest, and of course Senator Port, who is not with us today, and we miss her today. And then, of course, Senator Deems and Senator Rosen. We have a good mix of members with experience and some new blood, and it's really been a pleasure to have a committee like that. We couldn't do it without the staff. So just real quick, Committee Administrator Joel, of course my LA, Tom, Research, Andy Larson and Craig, and then Council, Mr. Stang, and the Fiscal, Mr. Mueller. They've been right there for us throughout the whole committee, and I really appreciate it. We've had a lot of great discussion and a lot of good debate. We don't always agree, but I do appreciate our committee members. And now to the bill, if I could, Mr. President. Working within the framework that we were given for this supplemental budget, we put a very heavy influence on that pathway to home ownership, creating more units. And you might ask why the heavy side of home ownership instead of multifamily and rental that we've traditionally done. We have a shortage of housing units. A shortage of housing units. We're short 50,000 housing units in Minnesota. So if there's one thing we can do to help the housing ecosystem, which every part is important, is that creation of more units. So we are very heavy on that aspect of creating more housing units. And then the other piece that I think is really important is that pathway to home ownership. I recently read an article that talked about the last decade and how much wealth was gained by middle-class America over the last decade. It was $2.1 trillion, with a T, dollars in extra wealth. So what can we do in Minnesota to help those that do not own a home and are able to get on that pathway? So keeping that in mind, that's how we crafted the bill. Getting people on that pathway to home ownership and then creating more units. So with the $50 million that we were allotted for home ownership and housing, we have a one-time general fund appropriation for a grant program for $35 million. We have $10 million for workforce home ownership program. We have another $10 million for manufactured housing parks to be converted into ownership. So for a co-op ownership, we create a new program where people can borrow money from the state to buy the parks that they live in. We have $5 million that we are borrowing from resources left over from the agency in what they call Pool 3 for Senator Dietzick's bill on sprinkler systems. And in hearing, we heard from Senator Dietzick that we have 21 nonprofit buildings that are 75 feet or higher with housing in them without sprinklers in them. So nonprofit high-rises, more or less, with housing in them without sprinklers. And so we set some money aside for a matching program for those nonprofits to apply to put sprinklers to protect the kids in those high-rise apartment buildings. And then the last piece is $5 million for Senator Champion's program for Build Wealth. Build Wealth came in and testified, and with their math, and if we take half of their math, it will be a success. But they feel they can help create 4,500 new home owners with the money that we are giving them. So that's just a real brief recap of the bill, members. And I think we can go to Senator Rest next.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to begin by echoing some of the words that Senator Draheim has talked about in terms of the comedy that exists on the Housing Committee. And on behalf of Senator Dietzick, Senator Port, and myself, we express our appreciation for the civility and the good conversations that we've had. We express that appreciation to certainly Senator Draheim, but also Senator Dames, Senator Rosen, and Senator Duckworth. We appreciate the commitment that in particular the chair has made to housing and increasing home ownership, making housing more accessible. But we also believe that the scope and impact of the investment that's made in the governor's bill is what Minnesota needs at this time. It is more comprehensive and is something that we should all support. The governor's proposal is balanced. It represents and reflects the wide range of needs that we have heard from people and communities across the whole state. The housing needs are across the housing spectrum, as Senator Draheim himself has said. It's impacting everyone, from those wanting to buy their first homes. Many of us remember the excitement of that experience, to seniors wanting to downsize and sell their homes and find themselves with no place to go. And especially, our attention is drawn to low-income renters. The housing units shortage has been around for a while. It has been exacerbated, but it has been with us more than for just the pandemic. The size and the 3-year structure of the governor's proposal, which is some 6 times the investment made in this bill, signals that we are all in and allows developers and communities to plan. And so you might ask, what are some of those provisions? And I'll be brief in talking about them. They certainly are, first and foremost, perhaps, community stabilization for $100 million that uses resources to acquire, to rehab, preserve existing renter and homeowners' housing so that it remains affordable for current and future households. With this investment, if we would follow the governor's lead, an estimated 2,850 homes will be preserved. Secondly, another feature of his proposals is one I especially like: homework. Homework starts with home. The funding there, which is some $10 million, provides rent and other housing assistance to families who are experiencing, whose children lack housing stability. And the funding provides housing assistance for an estimated 1,425 families each year. There are other programs for supportive housing, and then another one that I like in particular for homeowners is down payment assistance. We know that many families that would like to own a home and occupy it, that they can pay the mortgage payment. What they can't do is get together the amount of money to qualify for a mortgage. And there is some $12 million in fiscal year 23 and almost double that in 24-25 for that. But there is, in particular, one area in which we are very disappointed in this bill, and it has to do with attempting to overturn the will of the people. The will of the people in St. Paul and Minneapolis said, we want a program based on the votes that we took in a free and fair election. We want a program in our cities of housing stability with rental units. And so there are going to be a number of us that talk about this intersection of housing and democracy and why we should not overturn the will of the people because somehow we think we are better than they in determining their future. And we have no evidence whatsoever that we are wiser, smarter, more devoted to democracy, more devoted to a strong economy. So on behalf of Senator Port in particular, who cannot join us today in person, I would offer the A1 amendment.
Senator Rest moves the A1 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Rest moves to amend House File number 4366 as follows. Page 63, delete Section 29. This is the A1 amendment.
To the A1 amendment, Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. Request roll call.
Roll call requested. Roll call granted. Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I invite people to look at what the language that we are deleting does in particular, but it is not in the particular. It is not in the particular that concerns us. It is an attempt to usurp the will of the people by denying, calling null and void an election that they took to determine their future. And they didn't ask the people of New Hope that I represent, or Brooklyn Center that Senator Eaton represents, or any of the rest of you to act on that. They asked us to accept their decision about their future and how they envision stability and housing in their communities. It begs the question that we should interfere with that fair election to assert that somehow we know better than they do in the knowledge of their communities and what they want for their future. We don't. We need to let the cities, at this point, they have a charter. Any charter city could do this, to abide by their charter decisions, which was submitted. They were submitted to their electorate. Registered voters went to the polls, who are citizens of those two cities, and said, this is the future that we want to work on in terms of housing stability, and particularly with rental properties in our cities. And so, Mr. President and colleagues, I would urge a green vote. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
To the A1 amendment, Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Senator Rest for bringing this amendment forward. Members, in committee, we had a lot of discussion about rent control, and we were even blessed with a mayor of St. Paul to come in and talk to us about his position on rent control in St. Paul and the amendment that passed. And during that discussion, you know, it was pretty telling that the amendment wasn't well thought out bringing it forward. And why do I say that? There was no definition of what rent control or what rent is in their rent control provision. So as passed, it isn't really defined and needs to be modified. But we can debate that all we want, and why am I so against rent control? Part of it has to do with the economic impact of the surrounding areas and the community that enacts rent control. And for those members that didn't study econ in college, this was the poster child of supply and demand. When they gave examples of supply and demands, they always talked about a widget, and then they talked about housing and the supply and demand of housing. And throughout the world, not just in North America, throughout the world, rent control has not worked. And what have they found when they studied rent control, which is probably the most studied aspect of housing, is that when you impose rent control on private property owners, that stops the growth of more housing units. So what did I say in the open remarks? How many units are we short in Minnesota? 50,000. What did we hear in our hearings with Mayor Carter? He needed 11,000 housing units. What happened in just a short few months? About half of that, about 5,000 housing units were paused or stopped in the city of St. Paul. We saw building permits drop by 80%. Okay, 80%, members. Well, in Minneapolis, they actually rose. So there's been article after article across the country referencing St. Paul's rent control provision. Property values for multi-housing in the city of St. Paul dropped between 6 and 7%. And that is a loss of $1.6 billion in property value. And you might think, oh, these greedy business owners or landlords that own those buildings. What happens when you lose value in a sector in our property taxes? Another sector has to make it up. And that'll be the single-family homes. So, members, I could ramble all day on rent control and why I think it's the wrong thing to do. It has proven over the last 60 years that it's been studied that it stops the production of units, and we need units. So I urge a no vote.
To the A1 amendment, Senator Pappas.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to support the A1 amendment. And I certainly respect Senator Draham's position and support of housing and affordable housing, but that's not the issue before us right now, members. The issue is really local control and what the voters have decided, whether we agree with them or not. And 30,965 voters in the city of St. Paul, which was 52.89%, voted for rent stabilization. We have, I believe that many of us, probably most of us, do support local control. We certainly support local state control when we have issues with the federal government, and we talk a lot about how we support local control. And Mr. President, I'm not using the word hypocrisy. I'm not using that word. But I will say there's some inconsistency here in the Republican caucus position and Senator Draheim's position, as evidenced by this bill, where you talk about local control, but when it comes down to something, a policy that you disagree with, then suddenly the policy issue is more important. So members, I think the local community will struggle with this and will figure it out, and we need to let them do that. I was reassured by many developers that they could plan for the rent increase as they did their development, and the ordinance can be modified down the road if that's not adequate. But the issue really before us is, are we going to respect the will of the voters or not? And I would say we should respect the rule of the voters and support the A1 amendment.
Senator Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in support of Senator Rest's amendment. The last line in this bill says effective date. This section is effective retroactively from November 1st, 2021, just a matter of days before an election. The right to vote is a pretty important vote. I'm sure every single member of this chamber would agree that perhaps the right to vote is the most important right fundamentally given to us. But that right to vote doesn't mean walking into a voting booth. It doesn't mean filling out a ballot. It doesn't mean the physical act of voting. What it means is you know that your voice is going to be heard. You know that the government will hear the voice of the governed. The second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence begins with the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. Governments such as this are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed. And it goes on to say what happens to government if we become destructive of those ends. The people of the two largest cities in Minnesota, just days after this bill would repeal their vote, they spoke. Their voice was heard in a free and fair election. We have no right to retroactively rescind the voice of the people. Read the quotes around this building. Vox populi, vox dei, I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. To overturn this election is the work of tyrants. It is the work of oligarchs. It's the work of dictators. It's the work of despots, not the workings of a Republican form of government, which we all took an oath to uphold. I rise in support of the Ann Rest Amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Klein?
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I'm actually grateful to Senator Draheim for the lesson in economics. I didn't get a degree in economics. Everything he has said about rent control makes quite a bit of sense, and I am likely convinced by his position. But again, this amendment, the Rest Amendment, is not about the economics of rent control or that particular policy or its wisdom. This is about honoring the votes of a referendum that occurred in 2 cities in our state. We can imagine circumstances where, in my community, the county of Dakota County might decide to ban all cars, or the city of West St. Paul may hold a referendum and decide to eliminate all apartment buildings or to seal over their sewers. These are decisions that we at the legislature may or may not agree with, but we are bound to honor the will of the people in those communities when they themselves are the only individuals affected by the vote that was taken. That is to say, the people of this legislature, apart from those that live in the communities that are so represented, are not affected by these referendum decisions. We have no voice in what they choose to do with their communities, and we are bound by Constitution to honor their elected votes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. President and members, and I want to say what Swad said. Senator Swadzinski, with that booming voice, exceptionally eloquent, and I rise to support Senator Rest's amendment. I listened carefully to Senator Draheim talk to us about what doesn't work from an economic perspective around the issue of rent stabilization. And I would counter by saying, you know what doesn't work in a democracy? And what doesn't work in a democracy is when elected officials like us impose our will over those who sent us to do their work. And this provision in this bill nullifies an election. The citizens of St. Paul, the citizens of Minneapolis, and regardless of one's position on the policy and the reason, for us to stand here and nullify the work of the voters, which I hold as sacred, is a radical act. It's an extreme act. It is something we're seeing in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world. And so today, as I rise, I'm not only standing up for the citizens of St. Paul and their fair and free election, but for the sacred act of the voters in making policy choices by way of an election. This proposal is an extreme version of stripping the power away from the people, and it cannot be the work of this body. And so I ask you to vote for the Rest Amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A1 amendment, Senator Herr.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't planning to speak, but the subject come around to mention about St. Paul and rent control. It's wrong to blame or make excuse that the problem is rent control, and it's not all of a suddenly rent control just popped up. It evolved over time. The renter was struggling because many of the property are owned by absentee corporate landlords. And when we hit hard with COVID-19 pandemic, the exchange hand between corporate owner to another, to a new one, all of a sudden the rents go sky high and the people are suffering. And the people build up a voice through a referendum and vote and say, we need help. Yes, the city of St. Paul will try to smooth things through, but let's not make rent control as an excuse for our progress. We need to find a solution, so I'm here speaking support of Senator Rest's amendment. Thank you.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I just want to say I have the utmost respect for Senator Rest, as you well know. But I do want to make one comment about rent control. I've owned several apartments over my career. And one of the things that I don't know that everyone realized when they voted for this, I've lived in St. Paul now for 6 years. I've never seen more than about a 3 or 4% increase. And on December 30th of this prior year, I got a note underneath my door for a 43.79% rent increase. I don't think that's what the St. Paul residents anticipated when they voted for this bill, or this passage of the rent control.
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of you may not know that I grew up with a fairly Republican family in Western Minnesota, and I remember hearing all the time from my Republican family about how we don't like it when St. Paul tells us what to do. I don't think St. Paul would like it when we tell them what to do either. And I think the hypocrisy of the two does bother me, because I'm frankly shocked that we're legally allowed to even do that, and I would question the court cases that will come from that when the time comes. But, and again, I want to be clear, I've not stated a position on rent control. I'm not making an argument about this. I don't even see this vote as about that. You guys keep trying to make it about that, but it's not. The citizens of St. Paul made a decision, and it's our job to respect that. As someone who's consistently supported local control, I think it's pretty ridiculous that we can sit here and think we're going to overturn an election. And I will say that I do appreciate that I've been told that my friends across the aisle were very clear about what their intentions were, and I do appreciate that transparency so we can actually have the real conversation. But this is about overturning an election. That's it. And people made a decision in the city that some other people didn't like, and now they think they can change that. And I think that's kind of arrogant of us to think we can do that. And so I hope that we'll support the Rest Amendment. I think that it's the fair thing to do. And the idea of it going retroactively is really egregious to me. I think that's where we've really lost our way as a body. If we think it's okay to retroactively eliminate elections like that, that just is unbelievably unacceptable. And I hope that we'll vote for the Rest Amendment. Thank you.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I at least commend Senator Draheim for truth in advertising. He was quite clear, and I credit him. He said what we often refer to as the quiet things out loud in presenting these bills. In committee, he said the bill is retroactive to November 1st of 2021, which would nullify the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and their rent control measures, which they did vote on. And then again, a few days later in committee, this bill is retroactive to November 1st of 2021, which would have the effect of nullifying the vote in St. Paul and Minneapolis to enact or pursue rent control. And Mr. President, I wouldn't dream of trying to speak more eloquently and passionately and thoroughly than my good friend, the civics educator, Senator Swadzynski, so I won't, other than to say I completely agree. Elections are inviolate. Democracy is sacred, and to attack that is deeply troubling here in the Minnesota Senate. I will also go on to say, Mr. President, that we are often treated as representatives of the metro area, of representatives of the cities, to lectures from our good friends who live in other parts of the state to get our nose out of their business and not tell them what to do and what policies would be good in their parts of the state. So, Mr. President, I would suggest that the shoe is now on the other foot, that not only is the majority party exercising its policy perspective and opinion on a matter, but nullifying the very vote as called for in how democracy is established in home rule charter cities like I live in. We have over 100 of those in Minnesota. Why don't we just get rid of home rule charter cities, make every city a statutory city, and any ordinance that they can adopt has to be affirmatively permitted by an act of this body? I mean, why do we even have a home rule charter city concept to allow for local democracy, local policy debate, local policy experimentation, and the like? Mr. President, I appreciate and absolutely respect the difference of opinion on whether or not rent stabilization, or even call it rent control, has the desired effect of bringing rents down, of making access to affordable housing more available to more folks. People have different opinions, and the research holds a variety of perspectives. But I will just let everyone here know, and let the public listening, that at least in Minneapolis, there was considerable thought and subject analysis and debate and discussion, including a very highly respected and well-regarded Minneapolis rent stabilization study that was commissioned by the city and the city council, that was submitted in February of last year. It was conducted by the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota. And it informed the discussion and the debate, including the public discussion and the debate that occurred when the public was considering whether to vote on this measure. And they acknowledge that there are a variety of outcomes that could result depending on how well the policy is crafted and designed, and they are now engaged in the discussion of crafting that policy and that ordinance for themselves, and they're doing it with expertise, with debate, with public consultation, with process and consideration. The findings aren't as determinative as those who would oppose this idea represent on the floor here in today's debate. The findings show us that rent regulations have been effective at achieving two of their primary goals: maintaining below market rent levels and moderating price appreciation. That it creates housing stability for tenants who live in regulated units. There is little empirical evidence to show that rent control policies negatively impact new construction. Construction rates are highly dependent on localized economic cycles and credit markets. And it goes on from there. So it debunks some of the pretty black and white claims that are being asserted on the floor, the judgment that's being substituted for the judgment of the elected leaders of Minneapolis and the voters of Minneapolis. Members, I would hope that those who are in favor of this measure that's in the Draheim bill will read the Minneapolis Rent Stabilization Study, but also reflect on what are our values in a democracy and how much do we respect and regard the voters to determine for themselves the policies and the leadership that they want. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. And as always, Senator Rest raises very valid and reasonable points. I would say democracy exists to do a whole host of things, and one of the very fundamental things that democracy exists to do is protect private property rights. That's something else that's at issue here as we have this conversation regarding rent control and its impact on Minnesotans. The question is, what do you do when that vote has proven they will enact a policy that is extremely harmful to the housing market, not just in Minneapolis or not just in St. Paul, but when you talk about those two housing markets and their impact, you're talking about the Twin Cities region. You're talking about an entire metropolitan area. You're talking about the state of Minnesota. And if we know, if there are studies out there, and if we have real-time data within just the last few months that show us that the creation of thousands of housing units have been stopped, completely halted, in the midst of a housing crisis when we need those units, when Minnesotans need those units desperately. And then we find out that building permits are down 80% in the city of St. Paul, when they are setting record highs in other parts of the state where rent control doesn't exist. I'm not a researcher, I'm not an analyst, but I think I can put that together. And so really what becomes incumbent upon us as a body is when we're debating this policy and there's good points on one side and good points on the other side, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, will it be too harmful for the state? Do we need to step up at the state level, take action, and prevent further harm from occurring across the state and across our communities? And I would also give this frame of reference and context. For the last 2 years, there have been significant violations of private property rights throughout the state. Whether you agree or disagree with them, we've placed some pretty heavy limitations on private property rights. This does that to an even greater extent. That's an alarming trend that we should all be worrisome of in terms of precedent. As a democracy, are we going to stand for and uphold private property rights, or are we going to continue to watch them erode in front of us and allow them to contribute to the second and third order effects which negatively impact the housing crisis we're all trying to solve? Have great respect for the author of this amendment, but I strongly urge members to vote no. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I just want to concur with Senator Duckworth's comments. To me, this isn't a question of whether or not we value the vote that was taken, but whether or not the vote should have been taken. Our founding fathers upheld private property rights under common law, that they existed even before the formation of government. The very idea of private property rights goes specifically to our economic viability, the ability to get investment, to get economic growth, and yes, to make sure we have a supply of housing that's there to meet the needs. Mr. President, the Pioneer Press just recently reported that apartment starts are down 80% in St. Paul since this ordinance passed. And think about that. The people who were going to invest in St. Paul have pulled their money out. But the people who had already invested in St. Paul, the people who already owned property, have had those rights taken away from them. This is like telling a restaurant that's been existing in your city, well, we know your food costs have gone up, but you can only raise your prices a certain percentage. We would never consider doing that. Maybe to Senator Swedzinski, this is like a city passing an ordinance saying, we're going to pay our teachers a certain amount of money and it can only go up 1% a year. We would be outraged by that. Sometimes the voters get it wrong. Sometimes the voters should not be voting on something. To me, this is a constitutional issue. This is a value of property rights. And we need to stand behind those values. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Isaacson.
Mr. President, I am shocked and dismayed by the last two arguments that I just heard. One argument was, we need to protect them from themselves, as if the adults in St. Paul don't know what they want, and we have information they don't, or apparently we're smarter than them. That alone was, I don't think my friend Senator Duckworth meant that in the way it came across, but folks, that was a tough one to hear. However, the second part of that 1-2 punch is that, a lot of thought going into this here, is that somehow Senator Pratt is smarter than the collective wisdom of the people in St. Paul, or that somehow a bunch of people don't live there. I mean, I can't believe I just heard someone on the floor say that they know better than the people in their town do. And then a majority of them voted for something, and they're just saying, well, they got it wrong, so we're going to supersede them.
Mr. President, point of order.
Senator Pratt, state your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually have two things. One, I take offense to Senator Isaacson trying to impugn what I said. I said what I said, that property rights matter here.
No, I did not impugn. I repeated what he said. If you don't want to stand by it, that's on you,
Senator
Senator
Isaacson,
Pratt.
You did not repeat what I said.
I did repeat what you said, Senator.
Mr. President, point of order.
I ask both members to suspend. Senator Pratt, have you finished stating your point of orders?
Senator, or Mr. President, under Rule 36.5, we do have a rule that says a member may not speak more than twice on the same issue. I think this is Senator Isaacson's third time.
Second time.
All right. Members, I will point you to Rule 36.2 under debate. The members shall speak only to the question under debate and avoid personality. Encourage all members to abide by that rule. Senator Isaacson, please continue.
Thank you. So I can understand why you'd be sensitive about this. I wouldn't want to be responsible for those words either. I will tell you right now, Mr. President, I am aghast at the audacity. I mean, at least the argument about whether or not you want to drag this into a rent control discussion, at least there's an honest debate to be had there, and I respect it. I think Senator Draheim and even Senator Duckworth to some degree, that's where they're going with that. But to say sometimes voters get it wrong, and now, which is the words I heard, and now we need to do something to correct them because they were wrong. I don't know how you could take that any other way than the way it was said. Folks.
Mr. President.
Senator Nelson, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise for a point of order. I would encourage the President to look at Mason's 124, 2 and 3.
Senator Nelson, would you please explain your point of order?
Mr. President, simply, I will read them for the body. A member in referring to another member should avoid using the member's name rather identifying the member by district, seat, as member, or the member who last spoke, or describing the member in some other manner. We've heard 2 or 3 times where this rule has been violated in just the last few moments. Point 3, it is not the person, but the measure that is the subject of debate. So debating the subject we must do, we should do, it's our duty, but not allowing the reigning of motives of a member.
Senator Nelson, members, this was addressed. I'll repeat it again. Our Senate rules do take a higher precedence to Mason's as well, and I believe the points that were raised were also covered by what I read before in Senate Rule 36.2. The member shall speak only to the question under debate and avoid personality.
Mr. President.
I ask the members to abide by that rule. Senator Isaacson.
Mr. President, I should not have, just so I'm clear about this, I should not refer to another senator by their name but the county they're from? Is that correct?
Senator Isaacson, that rule does not appear in our Senate rules under this body.
So then, am I allowed to refer to another senator by their name, just so I'm clear about that? Thank you. And so the second problem, just so I'm clear about that, so the second problem is that the point of order was directed at me because they said that I was referring to motives rather than what was actually the subject of the debate. Is that correct, sir?
It would be to both of those points, Senator Isaacson.
Both of those points, sir?
Yes. The comments that Senator Pratt made, I believe, and the Secretary's conferring and confirming with me, we're both in agreement that his comments would have been to both of the points of your question.
Senator Pratt?
The personalities and to the subject. Please do not stray off the subject of the question.
So,
and do not use personalities personally against another member.
So, Mr. President, can I get a clarification then, while it's still my time, or do I have to wait?
State your point of inquiry.
Well, and so, Mr. President, when I'm having a discussion, and there's clearly a robust debate going back and forth, and someone says something you disagree with, I can't discuss my frustration with disagreeing with them? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
No, Senator Isaacson, we're going to the personality.
So, Mr. President, can you point out what I said where I impute his motives?
Senator Isaacson, I don't have the recording of exactly what you stated, but you came out quickly about your introductory comments were to, don't remember the term you used, but
aghast.
You were incredulous, aghast about the terms that you just heard Senator
Right.
Pratt state.
Right.
And Senator Pratt believed that went afield of personalities and debate. I'm going to ask all members to adhere to the Senate rules, stick to the question at hand, and avoid personality in debate.
Well, Mr.
Senator
President,
Isaacson.
I will continue to do so as long as they're being rationally applied, and I'm not sure that I agree with you or Senator Pratt on that. That being said, let me see if I can rephrase this in a way that's more acceptable to the body. Senator Pratt is wrong. Is that okay to say that? I want to know. I want a clear line, because this has been done to us forever. And we keep getting these points of orders when they hear something they don't like. And I wasn't calling him names. I didn't say he was a bad person. I was shocked by the comments he made and couldn't believe that was happening from us. I will work on being a little bit more, I don't know if respectful is the right word, but I have to tell you that there is a genuine frustration, Mr. President. Do you want me to hold? This is just...
Senator Isaacson, it's appropriate in debate to state that, in your opinion, another member is wrong and state the reason why.
Thank you.
It is not appropriate in debate to impugn motives or to go to personalities, questioning the motive of a member behind something that came forward.
Right, and I'm just wondering what that was, and I still have yet to hear that, even though I've heard complaint about it, and that's what frustrates me. That being said...
I'd encourage you to take that privately between you and Senator Pratt.
I certainly will be doing that, yes, sir. Mr. President, may I continue?
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you. So, again, this speaks to the larger problem at hand with this amendment. And this speaks to the, I have to give credit, and I think Senator Dibble did this as well, to the transparency of what's going on here. It is to overturn a lawful election guaranteed in statute by a charter city to vote on their own rules. And we're saying as a body, or we're attempting to say as a body, that we don't agree with that vote. And because we don't like that vote, we're now going to use our power here at the Capitol to tell those people in the majority, you're wrong, and we're going to make it illegal. Or we're going to take it away retroactively. Anybody in Legislative 101 knows retroactive bills are almost always a disaster. And this is precisely why. Secondly, the idea that we're going to presume to know better than them on something that results in what they want after a vote that was fairly done and resulted in the results it did is unacceptable to me. And I think a lot of Minnesotans would find that unacceptable. And I hope that we understand that the people of St. Paul have the right to vote to manage their city however they want. If you don't like it, bring a bunch of Republicans to St. Paul and change the elections. Make your argument to the people of St. Paul for something different. The people there did that and won an election fair and square. It doesn't make sense to take it away. And I'm dismayed to see that people think that they know better than what's happening in St. Paul. I find that unacceptable. I think we need to vote for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Latz.
Mr. President, members, I heard a discussion earlier about the importance of private property rights, and I respect private property rights. The Constitution addresses private property rights, as far as I can tell, only in two places, both in the Fifth Amendment. One, it says they may not be deprived without due process of law, which ordinarily applies to government agencies that are trying to engage in a takings, and they have to go through a legal process to be able to do that. But I would suggest a validly conducted election would certainly constitute due process of law, even if rent control, however it gets applied, would be considered to be a taking. I'm not sure that it would. Also in the Fifth Amendment applies to not depriving private property for public use without just compensation. But again, that's restraint on government conduct. I'm not sure how that would apply to conduct by the people in directing government to take certain activities. But I want to point out another provision in the United States Constitution. That's the 10th Amendment, that the powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Or to the people. It ultimately rests the power with the people, including the power to amend the Constitution, by the way, so we know that ultimately the people have the ultimate power to do so. And the ultimate exercise of that power are elections. Is there anything more sacred to our democracy than free or fair elections? And is there anything more blasphemous than the desecration of this principle? Making retroactive a provision that nullifies a validly conducted election is, in government terms, but to borrow religious language, blasphemous. Now, whether you like the results or not, whether you agree with the results or not, whether you would have arrived at a different policy position or not, that is not the legislature's decision to make here. It was the voters' right to make that decision, and they may someday, soon or later, come to regret that decision, but that was their right to make that decision. There may be voters who voted for some of us that regret that vote and regret that decision. Maybe more so tomorrow than yesterday. But that was their right to make that decision in a free and fair election. Now, the perpetuation of false facts to support the invalidation of an election would be and are treasonous to the jurisdiction. But the retroactive invalidation of a validly conducted and unquestionably filled with integrity election derogates the rights of the voters, and I would say, in many respects, is equally treasonous.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that we have exposed, if you will, the flaws of this particular provision in this bill. The remedy is not the state legislature. It would be a reverse referendum. That's what the people can do. And Mr. President, I hope that we could now proceed to a vote. Thank you.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. Lively discussion. I know there's strong opinions on both sides of this argument. But just to reflect on some of the comments that have been made, you know, we have, and we do all the time, have statewide laws. The Constitution does give us rights. And we can talk about liberties and rights, but government exists to protect the individual rights. Rent control violates the property rights of the property owner. And in my opinion, it's taking from the individual. So, members, I know I'm not going to change minds on this. I agree with Senator Rest that we should go to a vote. But just because a few people voted for a referendum. The city council did not even support the amendment. The city council did not support the amendment. So as we move forward with this process on this provision, I think one has to think about, if this was to move forward, and it is the will of the people, then is it the will of the people that no language changes in this? So anyway, I urge a red vote on this amendment.
Secretary will take the roll on the A1 amendment.
Point of order, Mr. President. Point of order.
Senator Rosen.
I believe members are not supposed to be conversing during a vote.
Members, we are under roll call. Call on Senator Jasinski to report the votes of members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler votes no.
Abler votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Anderson votes no.
Anderson votes no. Hold on one second. Got it. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Benson votes no.
Benson votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Coleman votes no.
Coleman votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Gazelka votes no.
Gazelka votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes no.
Ingebrigtsen votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Goggin votes no.
Goggin votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Tomasoni votes no.
Tomasoni votes no. Senator Frentz to report votes of members voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Fateh votes aye.
Fateh votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Johnson Stewart votes aye.
Johnson Stewart votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Newton votes aye.
Newton votes aye. Senator Frentz.
And I report Senator Port votes aye.
Port votes aye. Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Lopez Franzen votes aye.
Lopez Franzen votes aye. The Secretary will close the roll. There being 33 ayes and 34 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. We are on House File 4366. Senator Bigham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to come as no surprise to Senator Draheim, but I'd like to uphold and protect local control, especially when it comes to plan use developments. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to offer the A52 amendment.
Senator Bigham offers the A52 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Bigham moves to amend House File 4366 as follows. Page 50, delete Section 2. This is the A52 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Bigham.
Mr. Chair, this might be a quick one because I think Senator Draheim and I could verbatim do the role of what each other's going to say in this, but the 852 amendment deletes section 2 of page 50, which is the portion related to prohibiting planned use development. Members, planned use developments are vital for local government, local control. Statewide approaches to building codes to development does not work. Each local authority needs to have the ability to deal with their uniqueness, and basically the provision in the bill that I'm trying to delete prohibits cities from approving any, like conditionally approving any materials, design or other conditions if it's not already in the building code, state building code. And that's it's problematic because that's set to a minimum safety standard. And as we're addressing an ever-changing building design materials that we use, this is problematic. And so I'd ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested and a roll call granted. Senator Bigham.
And I would, thank you, Mr. President, and I would just like to say that the League of Minnesota Cities, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, Metro Cities, pretty much anything with cities, agrees that this is problematic for them. We need to preserve local control, let our local planning commissions do their job. And I will also say this because I know what Senator Draheim's going to say. No municipality requires PUDs. PUDs are requested by developers so they can put in the product that they want. They are not required by any municipality, contrary to what my good friend is going to get up and say to rebut what I am saying. Thank you.
To the A52 amendment, Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Senator Bigham for bringing forward this amendment. And you must be a mind reader. But members, what we're getting at on this section of the bill is prohibiting cities to go farther than building code. Building code is for safety and energy is the primary use of that. This is for single-family homes. Cities still can use PUDs. PUDs are an important part of the city's planning, and the builder or the property owner can request anything they want to do to the city. This just prohibits them from mandating aesthetics. So this would be like brick or stone front, a white picket fence, etc. So members, I urge a no vote.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, pretty familiar with the building code because I enforce it at a daily basis. But the building code is a minimum maximum code. You can't vary from the building code. Zoning and PUDs have nothing to do with the safety of a home. Now, you can build beyond the code, but you cannot enforce more than what the code requires. What this is getting at is what the bill does is it limits cities from requiring pretty. It actually allows the builder, if he decides to do more and put brick on or put fancy stuff on or do stucco, that type of thing, fully allows the owner or the contractor to do that. It only limits cities from requiring more. So members, vote no on the amendment.
Senator Bigham.
Well, members, I'm going to try it this way. This is not about local control. It's about local freedom. This is about freedom. And and letting our local governments have that freedom to make these decisions, whether they want white picket fences or not. Let the local planning commissions and local communities have that freedom to do that. Vote green.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President. A good discussion once again, members. Government doesn't get freedom, the people get the freedom. And then part of the reason we're going in this direction in our bill has to do with the affordability end of houses. And the National Association of Home Builders puts out a survey, members, every year. And they evaluate every state. And what they look at is for every $1,000 we add to the cost of a home. So for every $1,000 we add to the cost of the home, you eliminate so many people. And with today's interest rates, it's about 4,000 people per $1,000. So you add an extra $12,000, $15,000 onto the cost of that home, you eliminate that many people from being able to afford it. When I checked this morning, how many homes were available in Minneapolis and St. Paul, what we call active single-family homes in Minneapolis and St. Paul, under 300,000, what I would call that affordability end, and 300,000 is still a lot of money, I realize that. But I went up to 300,000. There was 162 of them. 162. Of them, 51 were already under contract. So that really means there's only 111,000 homes that we would deem affordable available in all of Minneapolis and St. Paul this morning at 7 a.m. when I got here. So we are trying to encourage cities to allow some construction on the lower end of the new construction spectrum. We realize that these aren't going to be first homes, but hopefully someone will sell their 40 or 50 or 60-year-old home and buy one of those newer homes that cost a little less, and we can get people in to a home. We have the worst home ownership gap in the country in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and that's what we're getting at. PUDs are the new redlining. Thank you, members. Vote no.
Further discussion to the 852? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on the 852 amendment. Senator Frentz to report the votes of members voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I report Senator Fateh votes aye.
Fateh votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Johnson Stewart votes aye.
Johnson Stewart votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Newton votes aye.
Newton votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Port votes aye.
Report votes aye. Senator Frantz.
I report Senator Lopez Franzen votes aye.
Lopez Franson votes aye. Senator Frantz.
I report Senator Putnam votes aye.
Putnam votes aye. Senator Frantz.
And I report Senator Hoffman votes aye.
Hoffman votes aye. Senator Jasinski to report votes of members voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler votes no.
Abler votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Anderson votes no.
Anderson votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Benson votes no.
Benson votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Coleman votes no.
Coleman votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Gazelka votes no.
Gazelka votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes no.
Ingebrigtsen votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Goggin votes no.
Goggin votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Tomasoni votes no.
Tomasoni votes no.
Mr. President.
Senator Bigham, for what purpose do you rise?
Absentee voters?
We're not under call, Senator Bigham. All members having voted who desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 32 ayes and 34 nays, the motion does not prevail and the A52 amendment is not adopted. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim, I heard a rumor that today was your birthday, so happy birthday. And how exciting. You get to talk about housing on your birthday.
Senator Dietzick, you took away my opportunity to ask him about his A53 amendment. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Several years ago, when Housing Finance was part of Senator Tomasoni's committee, and Mr. President, I believe you reminded us that it was logs, frogs, bogs, and jobs, or any combination of that. It also included housing. And we heard from local communities from Austin, Minnesota, to Jackson, Minnesota, to Thief River Falls, and Roseau, and Warroad. They came down and testified about the housing issues that they were having in their communities. They said they had jobs available, but they couldn't get people to fill the jobs because there was no housing. And now, about 10 years later, we are still hearing from some of them, and we are still hearing that this is an issue. Housing is an issue. It is affecting people in local communities, and it is affecting local economies. Everyone on the Housing Committee is passionate about ensuring that Minnesota has housing opportunities. We all want to do something to address this issue. Housing it's at the core of everything we do. Our home is our home base. And so I kind of want to go through some questions and talk about the bill a little bit. So will Senator Draheim yield for a question?
He will yield. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. So on page 64 of the second engrossment, and Senator Draheim, we've talked about this before, there is a line, and this has to do with the housing pool allocation, and there's a line about giving preference for projects with lower cost per square foot. And so I represent a community that has a lot of growing immigrant families, and many of them can't afford, they want to get into home ownership, but they can't afford to get into home ownership, and so they are looking for 2 to 3 bedroom apartments, and those are hard to come by. And so when I first look at this language, it kind of seems anti-family, because then it kind of is encouraging just, either efficiencies or 1-bedroom units, and I know that is not what you are getting at. I know you're not anti-family, and so just want to can you kind of explain a little bit about what you're getting at so that we can kind of continue to work on this? And I know we've had this conversation on that's not quite, we're not trying to limit 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom houses, but we just kind of want to contain costs. But if you could just briefly explain that. Thank you.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Senator Dietzick, for the question on this important bill. We have funded housing infrastructure bonds in the previous 5 years that I have been here more than we have in all of the years that we've been using housing infrastructure bonds. And when we drafted this bill, we still had $140 million that were unallocated. But there are needs from all those cities that you mentioned begging for housing projects, no doubt. To spread out those dollars and to use our money wisely, I think we should consider in one of the many factors that go into picking projects the cost per square foot. So it is one of many, 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 many factors that go into proposals evaluation. And members, if you haven't seen an application for a housing infrastructure bond, it stands on a table about 4 or 5 inches tall of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. And that is something we need to address hopefully when we come back next year. But yes, that is the intent, to spread out the use of our dollars more and get more projects through the pipeline.
Senator Dietzick.
Bless you, Senator Dibble. Thank you, Senator Draheim. Again, I appreciate the spreading the costs out, but I also just want to reiterate and work with you on this language because I am concerned that it will encourage people to just do efficiencies and 1-bedroom apartment units, and then that leaves out a whole segment that is, needs to live in apartments because they can't afford to get into the single-family home ownership, which this bill is hoping to move them into. But until they get there, we want to make sure that there's housing for them as well. Then if we go to page 61, and I'm going to talk quickly here, again, we are adding, because of and I agree with the commitment in this bill and the focus on this bill for home ownership. And we are adding owner-occupied housing to section 23 on page 61. And so this is for workforce housing development. So this is a program that is geared towards outside the metro. And we're adding not just market rate residential housing, but owner-occupied housing. And in this language, this is so grants or deferred loans authorized under this section may be made without limitations relating to the maximum incomes of the renters or homeowners. So part of that is to, build housing, market rate housing in rural Minnesota so that the workers can afford it. And I appreciate that, but when we're doing this without limitation on incomes, I want to work with you, Senator Draheim, as this goes to continue, because I don't want to, by having that language in there, and language later on page 62 where it says among comparable proposals, preference is given to projects with higher proportions of units that are not income restricted. And so how do we make this to the focus of workers and not executive lakefront housing in rural Minnesota? So look forward to continuing to working with you on that, to improving homeownership opportunities for the workers, but not subsidizing some of the executive housing. And then will Senator Draheim yield for a question?
He will yield. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this one we haven't discussed, and I get a little nervous asking a question I don't know the answer to. But on page, so it is line 52.27, and this is section 7, subdivision 43, housing disparities. And so again, you mentioned that we have in the metro area the worst housing disparity gap in the nation. In, I think, the 1950s, and I have the numbers here. So in 1950, home ownership rate for black families in Minnesota was 46.2%. Today it's closer to 26%. And white family home ownership has increased. The disparity gap is growing. So I appreciate the focus on this bill of closing that housing disparity gap and getting people of color into home ownership and giving them home ownership opportunities. And so the language here is the agency must prioritize its use of appropriations for any home ownership program under this chapter to narrow the racial disparity gap in home ownership. And I think that is a great goal. Can you clarify that? Is that in all of Minnesota housing programs, or is that in just a specific workforce development program fund?
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Senator Dietzick for the discussion. Yes, we have, like has been said over and over again, the worst equity ownership gap in the nation, in the metro here, and we are trying to close that. We are trying to encourage the agency to do more, because let's be frank, we have failed. We have gone backwards on what we have done. So any program that they have, they should be mindful, is what we're getting at. And we all succeed when we can get more people on that home ownership pathway. I always say legalize the American dream. But everything in this bill goes towards getting people on that pathway to home ownership, because that's how they build wealth. We've had a lot of discussion in committee on first generational home ownership and what can we do there. I think we have addressed it, and I think this is part of that. So thank you, Senator Dietzick. I hope that answered your question.
Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Yes, I just wanted to clarify that, and I agree with you. We have failed. Again, we went from about a 20% gap in 1950 to a 50-point gap right now. Black home ownership is around 25, 26%, and white home ownership rate is closer to 77%. The metro has the worst disparity gap, and the state has the 5th worst disparity gap. And we need to be creative and strategic to close that gap. We have a historic opportunity right now to use one-time money to close that disparity gap and help families build generational wealth. So now if you go to, I'm going to keep asking another question here, the Homeownership Investment Grants Program, and this is a new program that uses CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, to help get money more quickly out into the community and into nonprofits to provide those home ownership opportunity grants. And if you go to line 49.19, there is a requirement that the commissioners submit a report to the chairs and ranking minority members with jurisdiction over housing finance and policy detailing the use of the funds under this section. And I like to be a little more clear on that, and would like to, I had a discussion with Senator Draheim, and so I hope going forward that we can maybe add some more metrics in here, because this is a new program, and it has some laudable goals in closing that disparity gap. But I think we want some metrics in there to look at who is this helping? Where did these grants go? Who got these grants? And is this program doing what we want? And is it closing that disparity gap? Because that is so important. I agree with you. I appreciate the focus of home ownership in this bill. And as you said, maybe it's legalize the American dream. People say that home ownership is the American dream. And we can help people achieve that American dream. Not everyone wants to own a home, and we can't forget about those who don't want to own a home or can't own their own home because they don't make enough money. But we have many policies and law that promote and encourage home ownership, and we should make sure those policies are helping people to get a home. Is it giving them access to home ownership? It's really hard to save money. Many young families still have college debt they're paying down. They have increased energy costs, increased food costs right now, and they have childcare, which is expensive. Owning a home doesn't help them save money, but it builds them generational wealth. In the Housing Affordability Commission, which is Senator Draheim, Senator Housley, Senator Port, and myself, there is another member on the commission that talks about his kids want to move back to Minnesota. He wants them to move back to Minnesota, but they can't find a home here they can afford. Last summer, I was hearing from my constituents that they were trying to buy a home in the area, and they were getting outbid by cash offers. So as I started to do some research, I found some of those cash offers were people, this is during the pandemic, so some of those cash offers were people moving from the coast back here. They were selling expensive homes on the coast, so had extra cash, so we're paying cash here. But there were other trends happening too. It's called the financialization of housing. The treatment of housing as a commodity traded on the global market. Private equity firms, run by some of the richest people in the world, are buying up family homes and converting them to single-family rental. They're taking away your kids, your grandkids, and our constituents' ability to buy a home. They can grab that home quickly with cash and take that off the market, and the average Minnesotan can't compete. Building homes, which is the goal of this bill, building homes and building home ownership, which is the goal of this bill, will help. But if we build more homes, and other single-family homes are bought by these global billion-dollar private equity firms and become rental properties, we are not increasing ownership opportunities. We are not closing that disparity gap. We are not moving forward. These global investors, mega billionaires, are destroying the opportunity to achieve that American dream. These are not mom and pop landlords. These are billion-dollar global hedge funds, and they're equity mining our community. They're depriving families of generational wealth. They're taking away your constituents' ability to purchase a home, the ability to achieve that American dream. That's happening here. That's happening in my community. That's happening in Senator Champion's community. It's happening in Senator Kunish's community. There's a company, I don't know if I want to name them, they're a subsidiary of one of these private equity firms. The owner of the private equity firm was part of Goldman Sachs that created the Big Short that caused the last housing collapse. They currently own about 600 homes in the Minneapolis metro, including over 200 in North Minneapolis, in a small segment of Senator Champion's district. They kind of tend to do that, and they control that market. That's just one company. There's a lot more. And by controlling that market, they are controlling the prices, they're keeping people from buying homes in that neighborhood, and then they are controlling the rent market in that. And when they buy the homes, they are putting that upward pressure on what that price is because they are taking supply off the market. So right now, in most of Minnesota, they don't control the majority of the single-family home market, but this is happening across the globe. And in many areas, a large percentage of single-family homes are owned by these private equity billionaires. They're manipulating and exploiting the market and our communities. Do we want that to happen here? They're destroying homeownership opportunities for our constituents. They're destroying their ability to achieve that American dream. So other government bodies, from Canada to Pennsylvania to small counties, are looking at how do they preserve those home ownership opportunities for their residents. How do we preserve housing and home ownership opportunities for our constituents? In 1973, Governor Wendy Anderson and the legislature proposed a law. They passed a law. And Mr. President, I think I have to ask permission to actually read from the statute here.
Senator Dietzick, the way the chair or the president has been ruling on this, as long as you're not reading verbatim an extended letter, but you're just using a portion of a letter to paraphrase to make your point, that is within the bounds as far as the president is concerned. We're just trying to avoid reading a 10-page memo from someone who isn't in the room.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm going to read the purpose from the Minnesota Statute 500.24, and this was the law that was passed by the legislature in 1973. And the purpose, the legislature finds, it is in the interest of the state to encourage and protect the family farm as a basic economic unit, to ensure it as the most socially desirable mode of agriculture production, to enhance and promote the stability and well-being of rural society in Minnesota and the nuclear family. So in 1973, the legislature banned corporate farming. The legislature told Minnesota, we value family farms. So today, do we value home ownership? Do we value the American dream? If we value home ownership opportunities and allowing our constituents to achieve generational wealth and the American dream, should we ban corporate ownership of single-family homes? Mr. President, I have the A54 amendment.
The Secretary will report the A54 amendment.
Senator Dietzick moves to amend House File Number 4366 as follows, page 72 after line 6, insert. This is the A54 amendment.
To the A54 amendment, Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this amendment mimics the 1973 farming law. The purpose is the legislature finds that it is in the interest of the state to encourage and protect home ownership and single-family home as a basic housing option, to allow families increased access to housing through home ownership, for families to build equity and wealth through their housing, and to enhance and promote the stability and well-being of families and societies in Minnesota. So this bill does not take away any current property rights. As I said, the bill mimics the 1973 farming law. It has definitions of affordable housing. It describes a corporate entity, which means any partnership, corporation, limited liability company, pension or investment fund, or trust, but does not include nonprofit corporations, a family trust, or a family limited liability company. It defines a family limited liability company as a company originally organized under Chapter 322C, and it meets the following standards. So what we're trying to do here is we are trying to limit it from family trusts, from family LLCs, from small, again, the purpose is not the mom and pops. The purpose is not somebody who has, they have their house, they move in with their significant other, maybe they have grandma's house. We're not trying to stop them. So we have created some carve-outs. We have tried to be very flexible and expansive. We're not trying to keep families from...
Mr. President?
Senator Draheim, for what reason do you rise?
Point of order.
State your point of order, Senator Draheim.
35.2, I believe this amendment is not germane.
Advice, Senator Draheim.
It is a different section. As much as I would love to have this discussion on this, I think this is something we need to dig into. I just don't feel that this bill is the appropriate place.
Senator Draheim makes a motion, or stands for a motion of non-germaneness under Rule 35.2. Senator Advice, Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Draheim talked about the heavy influence, and a pathway to ownership is what this underlying bill is about. The underlying bill is about housing and pathways to home ownership. This amendment ensures that we don't lose supply. And if you go to page 24 under our rules, this amendment is about the same subject. It's about housing. And this amendment is to accomplish the same purpose, to create a pathway to home ownership, to create home ownership opportunities. So I believe that this bill is germane. It is about housing, and it is about home ownership opportunities.
Further advice, Senator Friends.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I rise in opposition and ask you to rule that the point of order is not well taken. There's two requirements for germaneness. I don't recall hearing a suggestion that an amendment was not germane, as close as this one is. Substantially the same purpose, and I assume we can agree this is the issue here, which is single-family home ownership and our desire to promote it. Thank you, and I urge the President to rule that the point is not well taken.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President. advice. This is probably a commerce issue. As much as I would love to have more jurisdiction in my committee, I don't feel that this falls under my area or this bill.
Further advice? Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the risk of being repetitious of my excellent points that my good friend Senator Frentz made, I recall many of the arguments as we debated previous amendments that were offered, as well as the presentation of the bill by Senator Draheim himself, that his aspiration, his hope, the thrust of the package that he's presenting to us is geared precisely towards the exact purpose and intent of Senator Dietzick's amendment, which of course is supporting property rights, supporting homeownership, supporting access to housing for more people, which is exactly the goal and the aspiration of Senator Dietzick's amendment, is to make sure that people have the ability to own homes and are not deprived of their property rights, that we have a public purpose that's served in greater ownership by individuals as they build wealth and own property in our cities. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator Drahan, further advice?
Just pointing out that there was a bill very similar to this, if not the same language, that was referred to civil law.
Thank you. Members, I've made my decision. I rule that the point of order is well taken. Senator Dietzick.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 14.4, I appeal the ruling of the President and request a roll call.
The question before the body is, shall the decision of the President be the judgment of the Senate? A green vote upholds the decision of the President. A red vote overrules the decision of the President. The Secretary will take the roll. Call on Senator Jasinski to report. Members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler votes yes.
Abler votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Anderson votes yes.
Anderson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Benson votes yes.
Benson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Coleman votes yes.
Coleman votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Gazelka votes yes.
Gazelka votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes yes.
Ingebrigtsen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Goggin votes yes.
Goggin votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
And thank you, Mr. President. Senator Tomassoni votes yes.
Tomassoni votes aye. Calling Senator Frentz to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Fateh votes no.
Fateh votes nay. Senator Frentz.
Senator Hoffman votes no.
Hoffman votes nay. Senator Frentz.
Senator Johnson Stewart votes no.
Johnson Stewart votes nay. Senator Frentz.
Senator Newton votes no.
Newton votes nay. Senator Frentz.
Senator Port votes no.
Port votes nay. Senator Frentz.
And Senator Lopez Franzen votes no.
Lopez Franzen votes nay. All members having voted with the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 35 ayes and 31 nays, the decision of the President is upheld. Members, a couple of housekeeping items. Rule 40.5, I will read it to you because this has happened twice, one on both sides of the aisle. A roll call vote may not be interrupted except to announce the vote of a member voting remotely under Rule 40.8 and to close the roll as provided under Rule 41.3. The reason I bring that up is that if there is activity or, in layman's terms, shenanigans, that needs to be brought up after we close the roll. It is correct that customs and usage has us only speaking with the individual who is seated next to them on the floor. That's customs and usages. And thirdly, I'm a violator myself because I was talking to the Secretary's desk. That is illegal under a roll call vote, and I did that myself. So I busted myself. Further discussion and amendments to House File 4366, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to follow up on some of what Senator Dietzick was working on about home ownership opportunities, because I think her attempt was to get at both the same subject and the purpose of the bill as Senator Draheim explained at the beginning, trying to promote home ownership opportunities for Minnesotans. And related to that, and just for a bit of real brief comment, Mr. President, and that is that I understand you have a good understanding of the rules, but when I read the germaneness rule, it talks about the bill, substantially same subject and purpose, and nowhere does it refer to the committee jurisdictions that this chamber sends bills to or what committee jurisdictions are, because I've heard several of the arguments, at least on this last one, that, well, what committees it would, I've heard that twice in the last couple of days about what committee a bill was referred to, therefore it must be a substantially different subject, and the rule doesn't refer to that in any way, and I just hope we can stick to whether it's germane to the bill, not to the committee jurisdiction. But on that note, and continuing with Senator Dietzick's push, I think it is alarming when she's talking about one company buying up 200 homes in one part of North Minneapolis. That's one company doing that. And these companies are very sophisticated, well-funded. They're able to outcompete with any homeowner, any potential homeowner. Young couple trying to buy a home, they don't have all, this is the first time they've tried to buy a home. They don't have all the inside knowledge that the companies that can do by buying up other homes in the market, and they can help set the price in the market and know how to bid on them. And they can pay cash for them and deal with them right away and put everybody else away, which is, again, I think, Senator Draheim, when you said at the beginning, the goal of making home ownership possibility, part of the American dream, is something we really want to pursue. And while I'm disappointed that we don't even get to discuss the concept that Senator Dietzick had proposed, I have an A55 amendment which at least enable that discussion in the future.
Senator Marty moves the A55 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Marty moves to amend House File Number 4366 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 71 after line 5. Insert. This is the A55 amendment.
To the A55 amendment, Senator Marty.
And thank you, Mr. President, members. The A55 amendment would require the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency to conduct a report on the impact of the housing market and homeownership opportunities when corporate entities are coming in and purchasing single-family homes. And the language, and I'll give credit to Senator Dietzick, who does the great work on this, that she saw the language in the report on rent control and suggested if it's worth doing a report on that, the same kind of thing ought to be done here. And the wording here, if you compare it to the language on page 71 for the rent control study report, this is the same thing. We're saying that we believe there's a really significant problem where our constituents are being outbid and outfoxed, and basically it's not David versus Goliath, it's David versus 20 Goliaths who are out competing against them. And they don't have a chance about this, and we ought to study this. If we're not ready to consider an amendment to ban corporate ownership, which again, 1973, the legislature in its wisdom made a good decision, I think, on corporate ownership of farms, and they did it wisely, and I think her amendment would have done, Senator Dietzick's amendment would have done well that way. At least let us study the issue. And this, like the study in the bill, are one that I think people who voted both ways on the issue of rent control would say that, you know, maybe we ought to do some studies of that. I think people here, the majority put in this study but for good reason. Then maybe the same thing should apply to this corporate ownership, because I can't picture there's any part of greater Minnesota or suburban communities or the core cities where this is not a problem now, or if it's not a problem now, will be a problem in the next few years. So I urge your support for this study. I think it's a very reasonable request, and I ask for your support and ask for a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, President and Senator Marty, on the amendment. I think the idea is great to do more studying on it, and you know, the Dietzick amendment that came before, I think, is something that we have to dig into. We had talked about it a year ago. We didn't do it. I did not have a bill in my committee on it, but we will continue to work on this issue. But I think you bring up a good point. Where is the housing inventory? And one of the fun parts of our committee is all the different groups you get to talk to, because housing really touches every corner of the state. You know, unfortunately, we don't spend a lot of time on the housing instability. Most of that is done through Senator Abler's committee. But every other aspect of housing, other than some veterans and a few other things, we do get to look at. I have a question for Senator Marty, if he would stand for a question.
He will yield. Senator Draheim.
Thank you. Would this include the inventory of cities?
Senator Marty.
Mr. President, Senator Draheim, the study was on the impact of on corporate entities, including everything from pension funds to any corporate entity that's purchasing them and so on. I have no concern about, I mean, I think it's a reasonable thing. We want to find out the inventory, who is doing it and how it's affecting that. I don't think that would violate any of the goal of trying to study that to make sure we figure out if some entity is buying up properties, perhaps for redevelopment of a bigger area or something. I think that's reasonable to include in it as well. But the difficulty we have here, and the reason for this is clear, I don't think that violates what we're trying to get at here. I think that might help.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Senator Marty. And the reason I bring it up you know, in the discussions with stakeholders, you hear things, you find out things, you talk to different various groups, entities, cities, counties, etc. And I was really surprised when I found out that Minneapolis has 257 homes. 257 homes. Now, earlier we talked about the inventory on the market. They have double the inventory, in my understanding, of vacant homes than what the MLS has available for sale. So I do think we need to look at things. Senator Marty, if you're okay, I will accept this amendment, but I will let you know I will tweak it in conference committee to include other entities. And I think you're down the right path. So I will treat it as a friendly amendment, but with Senator Dietzick's help, hopefully we can massage it and expand it. Thank you.
Senator Marty.
Mr. President, thank you, Senator Draheim. I think that is appropriate and appreciate that. And again, I think finding out who all is buying up properties and for that purpose, again, the goal, as you've said, for the bill is to make sure we give people an opportunity to get the benefits of home ownership. And I think that this is a reasonable thing to do. And your addition to it, if you can work on that in conference committee, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Senator Marty, did you want to lift the roll call vote? Did you want to lift the roll call vote? I think Senator Marty removes the roll call vote. Senator Limmer.
Thank you. Would Senator Marty yield for a question?
He will. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Marty, I'd like to direct your attention to page 1, line 31. In that line, there's a reference to the word realtors. Realtors are a member of a trade organization, and I believe for the purpose of this legislation, you may want to consider the term real estate licensee rather than a realtor.
Senator Marty.
Mr. President, Senator Limmer, you would know the terminology better than me, and I understand that, and I will encourage that to be something that's dealt with in the bill as it moves forward. But if you have a desire to make an amendment to the amendment, I'd be happy to accept that as well here.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. President, I can go either way. I trust Senator Draheim, if in the event this bill is passed, that it will be corrected in conference committee.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the A55 amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion does prevail. The amendment is adopted. Further discussion and amendments to House File 4366. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members for the lively discussion on the housing portion of this bill. We are quite a ways away from what the House has for a bill, but I do appreciate the input, and we will continue to work on this bill as it moves forward with Senator Dietzick hopefully on the conference committee with me. So I thank you for the discussion, and when we come time to vote, I urge a green vote.
Senator Westrom. And that's you, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President.
Senator Westrom, do you have the A57 amendment?
Mr. President, I move to amend the A3 amendment as adopted by the Senate with the language in the A57 amendment.
Senator Westrom moves the A57 amendment. The Secretary will report the A57 amendment.
Senator Westrom moves to amend the A3 amendment to House File number 4366 adopted by the Senate April 27th as follows. Page 1, delete lines 5 to 17. This is the A57 amendment.
To the A57 amendment, Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, members, I urge your support of the A57 amendment which leaves some language in place of the A3, but it removes the part that forbids new farmers to be able to start up in the state of Minnesota, as the language in the A3 amendment would have stopped any new family farms from being able to start up in deer farming. So I'd urge your support. But, Mr. President, what it does leave is the testing. When a test is available, that we start adopting that testing for CWD as soon as a test is available. I know the scientists and the universities are working feverishly. We have funded that with millions of dollars. Other states have too. University of Minnesota has reported some great success or progress, but they are not there. But as soon as they are, we want that best testing to be used, just like we would in all of livestock. So I urge your support of this amendment.
Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I request a roll call.
Roll call is requested. Roll call granted. Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. It actually does a little bit more than that. It also deletes the language about the on line 25 about other species of cervidae. Members, I don't know how much more clear I can be. We have sat here and done nothing on this very important issue for our economy. Again, $1 billion industry for hunting. 500,000 deer hunters. The Deer Hunters Association supports the amendment, the A3 amendment that was voted on and supported by 36 members. Nearly identical, if not identical. I haven't had the opportunity to completely do it, but I've been told that it's identical, is in the House bill. Why you wouldn't want to take this and agree upon this with the House? One thing, God forbid we agree on one thing between the House and the Senate to protect our hunting culture here. The amendment, clear as day, the A3 amendment, clear as day, does not include family farms registering if it's and transferring if it's a new farm. What the A57 amendment does is guts that. So I would urge a no vote, a red vote on this, and would hope that we can do this on behalf of our hunters, our culture here in Minnesota, and our billion-dollar economic boom that is the deer hunting industry. Thank you.
Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Bingham yield?
She will yield. Senator Klein.
Senator Bingham, when you offered the A3 amendment, was your intention in any way to interfere with the deer farming industry as it currently exists within the state of Minnesota?
Senator Bingham.
Mr. President, Senator Klein, no, my intention is to stop new farms from coming in that would contribute to the spread of CWD so we can get this under control.
Senator Klein.
Will Senator Bingham continue to yield?
She will. Senator Klein.
And as passed, the A3 amendment preserves the livelihood of existing deer farm industry and proprietors within the state of Minnesota without interfering with their business in any way.
Senator Bingham.
Mr. President, Senator Klein, yes.
Senator Klein.
So your sole objective was to prevent the further expansion of that industry or the importation into our state of potentially diseased cervidae?
Senator Bingham.
Yes, Mr. President. Yes, Senator Klein, and protect our deer hunters of over 500,000 of them and over $1 billion economy that is the hunting season here in Minnesota.
Senator Klein.
Senator Bingham, continue to yield.
She will. Senator Klein.
Senator Bingham, with the adoption of the A57, are any of the objectives that you aimed for in your A3 amendment preserved?
Senator Bingham.
Mr. President, Senator Klein, no.
Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion to the A57 amendment? Roll call being requested. Secretary will take the roll on the A57 amendment. I call on Senator Jasinski to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler votes yes.
Abler votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Anderson votes yes.
Anderson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Benson votes yes.
Benson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Coleman votes yes.
Coleman votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Gazelka votes yes.
Gazelka votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes yes.
Ingebrigtsen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Goggin votes yes.
Goggin votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Tomassoni votes yes.
Tomassoni votes aye. Calling Senator Friends to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Fateh votes no.
Fateh votes nay. Senator Friends.
Senator Hoffman votes no.
Hoffman votes nay. Senator Friends.
Senator Johnson Stewart votes no.
Johnson Stewart votes nay. Senator Friends.
Senator Newton votes no.
Newton votes nay. Senator Friends.
And Senator Port votes no.
Port votes nay. All members having voted with the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 34 ayes and 32 nays, the A57 amendment is adopted. Further discussion to House File 4366 as amended. The Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File number 4366, a bill for an act relating to state government.
Third reading. Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I would urge a red vote on this, and I would like to remind my friends in the Republican side of the aisle that we do have a doctor and nurses available here in the Senate to tend to any twisted arms, broken kneecaps, or nausea you may have had and sustained during your hour-long caucus to flip votes on that last amendment. Vote green, red.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just wanted to bring up a subject that is in the bill that Senator Westrom and I spoke about earlier, and if Senator Westrom would yield.
He will yield. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Westrom, we spoke about the language that's in Article 3, Section 16, that appears on pages 39 and 40. And I appreciate the changes that you've made to this language since the original idea was introduced as a bill. And I think, of course, the concern of the original language was that an organization that would accredit the kinds of operations that a state law change had dealt with in 2005 would have the effect of undermining that 2005 law, so much so that it would probably nullify that law. And I understand through conversation with you that wasn't your goal, that you're just trying to create some ability for a small, privately operated and owned zoo in Freeport to continue to continue to do well and thrive, which I appreciate and support. However, and I think this language that you have offered gets us closer to that goal and gets us further away from the concerns, but I have become aware of some concerns that this still creates some loopholes, and there's still some concern that we'll have some of these Tiger King type operations around the state. So, Senator Westrom, Mr. President, I was just hoping that we could continue to talk about this language and refine it so as to support your goal of protecting the zoo in Freeport, but not undermine the intentions of the law that we passed in 2005.
Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, Senator Dibble, as we discussed, I'm trying to represent my constituents, happen to be in this aspect of the bill, although there's many other aspects that cover many senators or legislators' issues, ideas, concerns. But certainly, as we try to work this out, I realize there's concerns kind of on both sides, and so we're committed to try to find a resolution that can work for the zoo, a private held zoo in my district, a small zoo in Freeport, but a very reputable, very nice facility, great facility for the region and the zoo goers. And so, Senator Dibble, if there's ways to tweak this, if it's needed, we will look at that. But we do want to help give them the relief. Right now, they can't bring in more monkeys, for example, because of the current law as it's being interpreted. And so it doesn't make sense on that front either. And so they do a reputable job. They, in fact, house animals for many AZA zoos, as they testified and provided us information in committee. And these AZA zoos come and look at the facility and approve it before they would even bring their animals. And so there's a lot of interchange going on to keep the zoo business or the entertainment of zoos vibrant in our state and in our country. And so we've learned a lot more about how these facilities work, and they have to work together in order to have genetic ability for reproduction and have genetic pools that are sufficient to keep good genetics going for the zoos to be vibrant. And so there's a lot more to this, Senator Dibble, but I'm happy to visit with you and continue to visit with you on this as we move forward.
Senator Dibble.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Senator Westrom, and you and I share the same goals, and I think the facility in Freeport is reputable. We're just trying to avoid the disreputable kinds of operations that we dealt with in 2005, most of which have either improved their operations or have vanished. You know, the Tiger King was not filmed in Minnesota. There's a reason for that, because we don't have any, or I think we have very few, I think maybe even just one of those remaining. And so for the monkeys of Freeport, Mr. President, I will continue to work with you, Senator Westrom. Thank you.
Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Members, I just wanted to rise in support of this bill. There certainly are some excellent articles that support agriculture, some excellent articles supporting housing. But I really wanted to point out the broadband part of it. The last couple of years, we've come to the realization how necessary it is to have broadband in all of our communities, not just in the metropolitan area. But with COVID, we found out real quickly how tough it was in rural Minnesota when we had businesses having their employees working from home. We had the schools having their students doing their work from home. We found out that we had some real issues in rural broadband. So I'm really happy to see the number of dollars that's put into this bill for broadband in general, and I think it's very needed. And so I certainly would urge a green vote to support the entire bill. Thank you.
Further comments before we close the bill? Senator Latz.
Mr. President and members, I found it very interesting that during the discussion on the PUDs, the planned unit developments and the restrictions in this bill proposed on the ability of local governments to require certain quality of materials or design features, that the justification for prohibiting the local governments from doing that, violating one principle of local control, was that it should be for the freedom of the people to make their own decision about how to build their houses or what to build on their houses. I found that ironic. I heard the advocacy that it was about affordability. But I found that ironic because of another provision in this bill which undermines the freedom of the people and undermines at least their goal of ensuring housing affordability with the passage of the St. Paul Rent Control Amendment. Now, reasonable people can agree to disagree on whether or not that is wise public policy and whether or not it would achieve the stated goal of increasing affordable housing stock within St. Paul. And we need not get into that policy argument because that's not the point here. The point here is about respecting democracy. Regarding the November 2020 and January 6 insurrection, the knowing and intentional effort to undermine election integrity without a basis in fact is not just mis- or disinformation. It is democratic malfeasance fomenting a form of civil war. Regarding the St. Paul Rent Control Amendment, today's GOP's knowing and intentional effort to overturn a validly, fairly, and securely conducted election simply because they do not like the outcome disrespectfully and arrogantly derogates the rights of the voters of St. Paul. Whether you like the results or not, that is not the GOP's decision to make. It was the voters' decision to make. And there is nothing more dangerous to our democracy than riding roughshod over their rightful decision. Now, there are some members of the GOP in the Senate that have explicitly refused to accept the valid results of the November 2020 election, and in fact, perpetrated the distribution of false information about the way in which that election was conducted. In fact, there are many members of the GOP that have done that one way or another on this floor or in other settings. And here again, we see the same theme, not only opposing local control, but opposing the results of an election, the efforts to overturn an election. I am sad to say that today is one more illustration of the Senate GOP repeatedly showing that they are unwilling to respect the will of the voters, the most fundamental tenet of our democracy. Whatever other good and not so good provisions are in the bill before us, for me, that is a poison pill, and I will be voting no.
Further debate on House File 4366. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, members, for the good discussion on this housing portion. In the Housing Committee, we have good discussions, and it is a good mix of urban, rural, and suburban members. I want to repeat what Senator Draham earlier said and thank the staff. They helped the committee run smoothly. Senate nonpartisan staff Chris Stang and Dan Mueller, Joel Hansen, the committee administrator, Craig Janisich, our DFL researcher, Andy Larson, the GOP researcher, committee LA Tom Cheetah, and my LA Tatiana Reed. And one of my interns is here with us today, Suzanne Herder, and we all know how much we appreciate all the work our interns do. And I want to thank our Senate pages because they help the work, especially in the committee. They help the committees run smoothly. It's a lot more work with the hybrid committees. I think it's very helpful to have people, especially in rural Minnesota, be able to testify without having to come here and drive through snowstorms, but it is more work. And we can't do the job without staff. So thank you to staff. As I said earlier, I do appreciate this bill's focus on owner-occupied housing and decreasing that home ownership disparity gap. That is something that we need to do. The funding that goes to the Build Wealth organization that is in the bill will provide assistance to help people get their finances in order and to purchase a home. I believe I said earlier there's about 61,000 Minnesotans Minnesotans of color, who make enough to qualify for a mortgage. They might not have down payment assistance or closing costs, or they can't find a home to get into home ownership. But home ownership isn't for everybody. I had a friend who bought a 1930s, 1950s home in my district, and he just got very tired and felt he was spending every waking moment fixing his house, and he got tired of having to deal with that, so he is now renting. There are others working, sometimes 2 jobs, but their wages have not kept up with the increasing housing costs, rent increases, or home prices. And in this K-shaped economic recovery, many are still struggling. Some are doing great, but some are still really struggling. We have over 500,000 Minnesotans who are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. Many are paying more than 50% of their income towards rent. We can't forget about them. We have to help them. Without stabilizing their housing now, they might never get stable enough, save enough to actually buy a home of their own. We need to figure out how to encourage more development at that very low end for those people making that 30% area median income so that they can have stable housing. And then maybe eventually they can stabilize their lives, save some money, and eventually achieve that American dream. As I said before, housing is core to everything we do. It's our home base. Everyone should have a home base that is safe, stable, and affordable. We have a historic opportunity right now to make that happen. Senator Champion yesterday talked about where's the beef. Well, I'm not going to say that because I think there is some meat in this bill. It just needs some other ingredients to make that Minnesota hot dish so that we can help people and communities with strategic solutions that are unique to our communities, kind of like our unique Minnesota hot dishes. I'm going to vote yes for this bill to possibly get on the conference committee, because I look forward to working with that committee as the bill moves through the process to find these solutions, because we have to find solutions. All Minnesotans across this great state, no matter their race, their zip code, or their religion, from Ada to Zambroda, should be able to live with dignity in stable, safe, affordable housing. And we can do that. Thank you.
Members, further discussion. We are in closing comments on the bill. So the order that I have here is Senator Dietzick, Senator Murphy, Senator Draheim, and Senator Westrom. And members, to remind you that you are to speak to the chair when you make your remarks. Senator Murphy.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, Madam President. And members, I do want to begin here at the end of what feels like the end of the term to thank Joel Hansen and Jackie Clinton, Andrew Larson, Hannah Grunwald, and Laura Painter. I'd like to also thank Chair Westrom for a good orientation to a new committee. The bill in front of us dealing with agriculture and rural economic development includes a number of important provisions, things that I feel excited about. I know our caucus feel excited about. The investment in forever green and cover cropping, taking an idea that has been long past due and finding its way into this important piece of legislation and all of what it means for our land, our soil, and for the opportunity of future economic development. Really, really important. Senator Herr spoke earlier about the provision around underrepresented farmers and emerging farmers, and I'm grateful that that was included as well. The investment in meat cutting and meat cutting education and training across the state of Minnesota is going to be an addition to an important part of rural places and a market. And of course, further investment in RE and the vet diagnostic lab, important, especially in the moment of time where we are experiencing things like avian flu and chronic wasting disease. I am glad for those scientific investments. This morning, the Ag Commissioner sent a message reminding us that 2022 is not off to the best start when it comes to planting season. It is the slowest planting season, or the slowest start since 2013. And I hope that that is not a harbinger for us of what is to come. I hope that we end up with a robust planting season, but following drought and the lack of drought relief, and now what is an unseasonably cold and wet planting season, I am crossing my fingers that we are prepared for what could be a difficult year, 2022, for our farmers. And let's not forget that a part of this committee's jurisdiction is about rural economic development in rural places for people who live in rural places. We have one important provision in this legislation that deals with that, something that we debated quite a bit last session, and that is the extension of broadband and funding for broadband. There are two funding sources that bring together $110 million for broadband. One of those is the Biden administration's funding on ARPA, and the second is the Biden administration on infrastructure, both sending money to the states. And we are taking hold of that money and doing something that we have talked about doing for a long time, which is making a real investment and hopefully getting closer to the goal, that important goal of broadband and connectivity across the state, which means people can choose to live and work and learn wherever they want in the state of Minnesota. It is central to who we are and to our future. I, in the end, am going to cast a no vote on this provision or on this bill, not because of what's in the Ag bill, but because of what is in the Housing bill. And as a representative from St. Paul, as I spoke earlier, I'm deeply concerned about the nullification of a fair and free election that is contained in this bill. And as Senator Latz said, it is a poison pill in this proposal, which would otherwise earn many votes, including potentially mine. But in this case, I cannot, and I would urge my colleagues to vote no. Thank you.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members, for the great discussion today. You know, the housing portion of this bill, once again, strong funding for home ownership to help close that equity gap. We have Build Wealth in there, one of Senator Champion's bills that he had. We have provisions from Senator Duckworth, Senator Dame, Senator Dietzick. I think it's a well-rounded bill that goes at the problem. And the problem is we don't have enough units. When you don't have enough units, you see rents go through the roof, which we had discussion on. We see house prices go through the roof, which we had some discussion on. And also in this bill, we offer some no-cost free market solutions to help further the state on and closing that equity gap. So thank you, everyone, for your time, and I urge a green vote.
Senator Westrom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I urge your support of this agriculture, rural broadband, and housing bill. Let me first start off by thanking, as other members have, thanking the staff that helped make this possible. There's a lot of hard work that goes into compiling the bills and sorting through all the bills that go through the committee. Some succeed, some move further than others, some need a lot more work. And so without that staff, it would be impossible to do. And so I want to thank Joel Hansen, our committee administrator, Ben Abrahamson, our committee legislative assistant, as well as Andrew Larson, the Republican research support staff, and Jackie Clinton, the DFL support staff, and our Senate counsel, Laura Painter and Hannah Grunwald. And so I thank them for helping put this together. There's a lot more work to yet do as we go to conference committee. But members, this is a good bill for agriculture. Let's remember, it's a supplemental budget. We set the budget last year for 2 years. These are areas that we're targeting some additional priority and resources to. The meat cutting and the advancing of more career and opportunities for meat cutting to make that more vibrant in our state, more availability of employees and training. Helping out with cover crops and helping advance some of those initiatives, incentives that help let the farmers figure out best ways to practice, incorporate some cover crops into some of their farming practices, help out with emerging farmers or other African farmers, find new ways to keep expanding the agriculture opportunity for family farms in our state, whether you're just outside the metro, in the metro, or across all of greater Minnesota. We have enough room in this state to have a variety of farmers, big and small, some traditional crops, some niche crops, different types of livestock. So we should embrace that opportunity we have in this state, and we do that with this bill. Additionally, the big investment in broadband cannot be undersold. Up to $210 million of directing that federal money into building out our border-to-border. Let's get this job done. Members in the Senate, we can be the leaders for the state of Minnesota, and we can be nation-leading with this bill. So I urge your support of the agriculture, the big investment in broadband, and the housing provisions to make home ownership much more of a reality for families across our state. I urge your support.
The Secretary will take the roll on House File 4366 as amended. I call on Senator Jasinski to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler votes aye.
Abler votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Anderson votes aye.
Anderson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Benson votes aye.
Benson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Coleman votes aye.
Coleman votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Gazelka votes aye.
Gazelka votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Ingebretson votes aye.
Ingebretson votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Goggin votes aye.
Goggin votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Rarick votes aye.
Rarick votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Senator Miller votes aye.
Miller votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Thomasoni votes aye.
And Thomasoni votes aye. I call on Senator Frentz to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report Senator Fateh votes no.
Fateh votes nay. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Hoffman votes aye.
Hoffman votes aye. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Johnson Stewart votes no.
Johnson Stewart votes nay. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Newton votes no.
Newton votes nay. Senator Frentz.
I report Senator Port votes no.
Port votes nay. Senator Frentz.
And I report Senator Lopez Franzen votes no.
Lopez Franzen votes no. All members having voted, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 41 ayes and 26 nays, House File 4366 as amended does pass and is title agreed to. Remaining under motions and resolutions, announcements before we recess. Announcements. Senator Curran.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to announce tomorrow the Civility Caucus is hosting the April luncheon. We're going to be in room 316. We have a great speaker, and it's a hybrid, by the way. We have Amanda Ripley will be there, and about working together. Great topic for tomorrow. But it starts at 1 o'clock, and so Senator Swedzinski and I are the Senate leads on it, and so we'd like everybody to attend if they can. Depending on our schedule and the brevity of our conversations, we all may be able to attend. Thank you.
Any additional announcements? Announcements. Senator Johnson. Oh, before we go, let's have some excuses. Without objection, the following senators will be excused from today's Senate session. Senator Pratt from 2:15 to 3:25 p.m. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. We're going to recess here to the call of the chair. We're just going to do some paperwork, accept some committee reports here, so a smaller crew at that point. So, Mr. President, if I could make the motion here to recess.
Before that motion, Senator Bach.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We had a capital investment committee scheduled for this afternoon, but it's gotten too late in the day. There's too many members have conflicts. So our intent is to reschedule that for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock.
Watch your emails. Senator Johnson, there was also a Rules Committee. Are we abandoning the Rules Committee?
We are
Senator
not
Johnson?
abandoning. We will be doing that at approximately 4:45, 4:15, 4:15 this afternoon.
Senator Johnson renews his motion to recess to the call of President. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. The Senate is in recess.